Okay, here's a weird analogy about pivot chords that just came to mind. I don't know if this is even appropriate, but I'm just going to tell the story anyway. So, at one point when I was in graduate school, uh, my teacher hired me. So, my teacher was taking care of a composer who is a well known composer whose name I won't mention, but she was in a nursing home and she had dementia. She didn't really know a lot of what was going on at the time. But we lived in Baltimore and she was in New York. And they wanted to get her closer to where he lived, my teacher, because he was in charge of her estate and taking care of her. So he wanted to get her closer, but she didn't want to leave New York. Uh, so this is really kind of terrible. But I gotta continue now. So what he did, because she was not very knowledgeable about what was happening around her, what he did is he hired me and a friend of mine, to get a moving van, go to New York, and while the nurse took her out somehow, the nurse took her out of her um, room in the nursing home for a night, and we loaded up all her stuff, and we drove it back down to Baltimore, and we went to a new nursing home in Baltimore, and we set it all up. And then the nurse eventually drove her down to Baltimore and just said, "Okay, now you're home." And she didn't really even know that she wasn't in New York anymore. She was in Baltimore. That's kind of how pivot chords work. Weird analogy. I don't know if you stuck with me through that, but basically, we're we're starting off a drive, and then we're gonna get home, and the home that we get to is gonna be somewhere totally different, and we're not even gonna know it. Um, that's how it works. It's really weird, but that's how it works. Okay, so um, a couple rules about pivot chords. Um, we've talked about this, but uh, here in this case, we used the 6-2 progression. So 6 in one key, 2 in the other key. I shouldn't say progression, but the 6-2 pivot, which is usually a really good one because they're both predominant chords, right? They both can function as predominant chords, so it can lead you to do something in a 5, after it, a dominant area, and then you can kind of cadence in the 1, which is exactly what we did here, right? So we did 5, diminished, 1. Like I said before, using the pivot of 1 and 4, 1 in the first key and 4 in the other key, it's not a very strong one. It's just really hard to convince somebody that the new tonic is home. The home has changed because it didn't really change that much. So that's harder to get away with. Another one that's hard is 3 and 6. So 3 in the key of D, 3 would be F sharp minor, and in the key of A, 6 would be F sharp minor. So the 3 and the 6, that's hard just because 3 just isn't a real strong tendency chord. It doesn't really feel like it needs to go anywhere. So it's hard to use that by itself as a pivot chord. And also 5 and 1. So 5 in our first key, so that would be A, and 1 in our second key would be A, both major. So that could be a pivot, but that just tends to sound like 5 and 1 in the old key. It doesn't really pull you into the new key very strongly. So that one's tricky too. Now, all of these relate to just the pivot chords related to going from a tonic, or going from one key to the dominant of that key. So a modulation from D to A, right? Now we can go through modulation from one key to any other key, and we will go through a good handful of them in the next couple of videos, but because they each have their own, what's good and what's bad. But generally speaking, when you're modulating from a one key to the dominant of that key, so you're modulating up a fifth, the 6-2 pivot motion is generally speaking, the smoothest way to go. So, something to keep in mind about that. Okay, that being said, let's look at a different pattern. So let's look at if we were in a minor key and we were modulating to its relative major. How could we do that with a pivot chord?